Hi, I'm Lindsay Lisney. I am on the workshop planning committee and reporting from Minnewaca, North Dakota. I am introducing Joe Ikley today. In 2019, the Northern Plains on both sides of the Red River were fortunate to have lured Dr. Joe Ikley away from Purdue University in Indiana. Whereas a newly minted PhD, Joe was working as a weed program specialist. Joe works for NDSU as an extension specialist and assistant professor in the field of weed control. His presentation today is going to cover some of his challenges in using dicamba and 2,4-D post-emergence and herbicide-tolerant soybeans.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, everyone else, for tuning in this afternoon. So really just thought it'd be interesting to use a title like the one I chose, because when we talk about these new herbicides in soybean, it's always important to remember that in the historical context, 2,4-D is the first herbicide that we synthesized, and dicamba wasn't too far behind. So both these have been used out in the world for at least the last 50 years. And so there's certainly some things we had learned 50 years ago, and some things that have been forgotten along the way, and we're relearning some of the growing pains along the way. So I figure we'll kind of revisit some of the issues that we can run into using 2,4-D or dicamba and extend soybean. The first thing I'll just point out, I've been showing this picture a while just of a Palmer amaranth infestation. One thing I haven't really pointed out publicly in this picture is if you look at this Palmer on the right side of the screen, it's a little bit different color than the strip next to the corn. Art and science tip number 1, don't spray 6-foot tall, headed out Palmer amaranth with dicamba and expect it to do really anything. So just keep that in the back of your mind moving forward, because we all know we want to target smaller weeds. Okay, before I really get into what I want to talk about today, really the number one question of my extension season has been, where the heck is the weed guide and how do I get it? So this QR code on the bottom left, I'll have this on my last slide, but if you want to get an electronic version of the guide, this brings you to the website where it's housed. You could also just Google NDSU Weed Control Guide. If you're near campus, you can go to ACAW, the distribution center. It's in the Morrill Hall basement, or you can call the number here on the screen to order your copies. So we printed plenty of these. We just don't have the capability to hand out a whole lot in person due to having virtual meetings like the one here today. Okay, so when it comes to 2,4-D and dicamba, there's 4 things I really want to cover today, and I have a couple of slides in my back pocket if I go through this quicker than I wanted to, but really quickly covering some label updates for the Extend platform, looking at some antagonism issues of 2,4-D and dicamba when it comes to grass control, looking at some of the post-emergence options we have available for water hemp, really just going to show some pictures of water hemp from our research plot, and then some mixing compatibility issues that we've run into the last couple of years with the Enlist system. So the first thing I want to point out, Dr. Tom Peters has led the effort to put this chart together. It's a 2-page fact sheet we have between NDSU and the University of Minnesota, talking about all the different crops we have and the herbicide resistance traits in those crops. So it's been updated. It's now online for the new 2021 version. And the main thing I want to point out when I bring up this chart, here's the soybean table from that guide. And just point out that we do have Extend Flex soybean on here, just to highlight the fact that we do have Extend Flex available for the 2021 growing season. So most people are probably familiar with what that is, but it's basically the Extend soybean system, which is glyphosate and dicamba, plus glufosinate tolerance or Liberty. So the ability to use all 3 of those products post-emergence in one soybean platform. Okay, so the label updates when it comes to dicamba. So Ingenia, XtendiMax, and Tavium have received their new labels. Fexapan I have not heard being approved yet, but it should be relatively easy to get approval on Fexapan if you'd like to use that product as well. Currently, they're set up to have a 5-year registration rather than the past iterations have had a 2-year registration. A couple of differences. Before I get into these differences, the one thing I do want to point out is that the similarities, basically all the old restrictions that we have as far as wind speed, sprayer speed, things like that, Those are all the same, but we have, of course, additional restrictions on top of that. And one of the main ones is now for the Ingenia and XtendiMax, you can only use these on the Xtend or the Xtend Flex soybeans. Or if you try to grow cotton for some reason up here, you can do it on Xtend or Xtend Flex cotton. So we can't use Ingenia or XtendiMax on corn anymore, pastures, things like that, just the Xtend crops. The other thing is now we have a national cutoff date of June 30th, and that is also adopted regionally for both North Dakota and Minnesota and South Dakota. So we're all in alignment in 2021 with that June 30th cutoff. There's a couple growth stage cutoffs on the XtendiMax and the Tavium label. So XtendiMax is June 30th or after R1 is when you stop spraying, whichever comes first. And then Tavium is June 30th or no applications after V4 or 4 trifoliate. And that growth stage is really driven by the S-metolachlor or the dual magnum that's in Tavium. The other big one is the adjuvant requirements. So both Ingenia and XtendiMax Tavium, they now have an additional adjuvant we have to add with each application. For Ingenia, they call it a pH buffering adjuvant. XtendiMax, it's called a volatility reducing agent. It's just an additional thing we throw into the tank to reduce volatility and mitigate off-target movement through that mechanism. Just check the websites right before I started talking here. There's currently 17 products approved for XtendiMax, and I think it was 13 for Ingenia. They're basically the same products. It's a bunch of products that will be a brand name powered by Vapor Grip Extra, and then Ingenia has one called Centris. So a couple of different options there, but it's basically two different types of products that are approved to date. Then the last thing that I'm going to address here is the buffers for using these products. We now have increased our buffers to 240 feet downwind to sensitive areas in all applications. If you do have a qualified hooded sprayer, it's still the 110-foot downwind buffer. The biggest change is more strict rules in these counties with endangered species. And so I apologize for the blurriness of this map here. I cut this from the Bayer fact sheet about the endangered species counties. But if we look at North and South Dakota and Minnesota, the counties that are in red are counties that have been identified that contain an endangered species of concern. And what this means is it basically triggers a new set of rules for making these applications that make it a lot more stricter to apply these products on Xtend soybean in those counties. And so I've got a chart here that basically breaks down the difference between an endangered species county and a county without an endangered species. The main thing to point out, if you're in one of these counties highlighted on that map, you have to have a 57-foot omnidirectional buffer, so all edges of the field, and then plus 310-foot downwind buffer. And the other big thing is that in those counties only, the only thing we can include as buffer is that crop-wise are dicamba-tolerant soybeans. If you're not in those counties, we can still use things like corn, small grains, other DT soybeans. For some reason, in these counties, we can only use the dicamba-tolerant soybeans as a buffer. So basically that means if you have a wheat field upwind of you, you have to be at least 57 feet away from that wheat field when you're spraying your Xtend soybeans because of the way that the label there is written. Okay, so enough there on the label updates. Going to focus a little bit more on some other things and going to switch gears to the antagonism of using these products when it comes to grass control. So a couple slides of data here from Kirk Howlett here at NDSU. And so what Kirk did a couple years ago was he decided to spray 3 of our different Group 1 herbicides. So Assure 2, Fusilade, and then Select EC alone. So by themselves at a low rate. So 3.6 ounces of Assure, 3 ounces of Fusilade, and 6 ounces of Select. That's the green striped bar on the far left of each column. And then we tank mixed that with a low, so we tank mixed, in this case, dicamba and Xtend soybean with that low rate, which is the red bar, the medium rate, the yellow bar, and then a higher rate with the green bar. And so what we're showing here is that if you use the same rate of our Group 1 herbicide, tank mixed with dicamba, we lose control in volunteer corn across all 3 products. So basically comparing the red bar to the green stripe bar next to it, same rate, but just with the addition of dicamba. And it really takes getting to these higher rates that we tested to get equivalent volunteer corn control that we would have if we did not have dicamba in that tank mix and just apply that lower rate of the product. So that was an extend. So here now we have with the Enlist soybean system. So again, the same setup here where the low rate and the rates of the group 1 product are the same. And then we add in Enlist 1 as a tank mix partner. And where we really see that antagonism on volunteer corn is with the Sure 2 in the Enlist system, where if we keep that low rate tank mix with Enlist 1, we basically just tickle the corn a little bit and we're not going to get any sort of control. It takes us getting up to those higher rates to get anywhere in the same neighborhood of volunteer corn control that we would have had if we just had left Enlist 1 out of the system. So we use 2,4-D and dicamba in small grains, and we know this can be an issue with some of our group 1 herbicides that we use in small grains, losing some grass control. But if you don't use those combinations in small grains or think that just because we can use higher rates in the soybean system, we can still have the same issues with losing grass control with these group 1 herbicides tank mixed with the group 4 herbicide. So here's just in picture form the data I was showing in the Enlist chart there. So here's a Sure 2 plus Enlist 1. The top chart here is picture here is just a Sure 2. Bottom left is that low rate. Bottom middle is that middle rate tank mixed with Enlist 1, and then the bottom right here is that higher rate of a Sure 2 tank mixed with Enlist 1. So again, just showing it takes at a high rate to really get close to the product by itself. And here's the same setup with Fusilade by itself, low rate, mid rate, and high rate with Enlist 1. And then Select again by itself and the 3 rates on the bottom. So that's volunteer corn. What about our grassy weeds? And so we don't have a whole lot of data up in this area of the country yet about some of these issues with antagonism on grass weeds. So I'm going to turn to the south. My colleagues down in Tennessee, kind of a joke amongst weed scientists is weed resistance is going to start in Tennessee or Arkansas. And so we kind of look down to those guys. They tend to be a couple years ahead of some of the resistance issues that we'll face, but also some of the other issues because in the case of the Extend and Enlist system, they've had the cotton crop, and that gave them about a 1 or 2 year head start on using these commercially. So what this chart is showing, and I put the rates here in fluid ounces of products on the left, is this is control of jungle rice in systems down in Tennessee. Now, we don't have jungle rice up here, but we have its cousin, barnyard grass, and they are both very difficult to control with glyphosate alone. And they're seeing similar results on barnyard grass down in Tennessee, just jungle rice is a little bit more difficult to control. And so some of the research that they've done is using a relatively lower rate for that part of the country, standard for some of us, but we really want to get to a higher rate of glyphosate. So 22 fluid ounces of Power Max. Alone, they were seeing 80% control. Tank mix in, half a pound of dicamba, lost about 20 to 30%. Same thing with clethodim, in this case, 12 ounces of Select Max. As soon as you tank mix in that dicamba, lose control on jungle rice. So this has become actually very problematic on the commercial scale, and it's interesting talking to my colleague down there where he really focuses on cotton haul piles outside of factories, and that's kind of how he judges his weed control program across the state for the year. And the last 3 years, he's seen a shift from Palmer Amaranth growing out of those piles to jungle rice and barnyard grass, because they've been able to get pretty good control of things like Palmer Amaranth with the Extend system and cotton, but using just tank mixes of glyphosate and dicamba or Select and dicamba, they've really lost grass control, and they're teasing out the differences, and it's really this antagonism of mixing dicamba with a glyphosate over clethodim. And to the point here where I've pulled out one page from the University of Tennessee Weed Guide, and just showing that here's jungle rice and barnyard grass. If you go over here to their ratings for Roundup Power Max, they basically give it a 7 out of 9 for control to begin with, but then they've even marked it to glyphosate susceptible populations expect poor control when tank mixed with dicamba. So it's become a pretty big deal down there. And one of my concerns is with all the barnyard grass that we have up in this area of the country that this could start becoming a real issue for us in the next year or two. Okay, so switching gears here now from that antagonism piece on grass control, I want to look at some of the options we have available for post-emergence control in the Enlist system. And so I'm going to show some of the pictures from my research trials here at Fargo on a glyphosate-resistant water hemp population in 2020. This particular trial was set up with no pre-emergence herbicides. Of course, when we do go after water hemp, we do want to have that pre-emergence herbicide on. One of the things I always like to point out is that in our research trials, if we have very wet ground, we can still backpack these post-emergence herbicides on when the weeds are 3 inches, even if the field cannot traffic a sprayer. So I kind of keep that in mind as just showing what these products can do if you catch water hemp at the right size, but certainly on the commercial scale, never going to recommend skipping a pre. So I'm going to show a series of different combinations here. The products will be on the left or on the top of each picture. And I do want to point out that in the Enlist system, whether it's Roundup, we're using Roundup Power Max, we're using Liberty, and we are using Enlist 1. Each of these products in every picture I'm going to show was applied at 1 quart per acre. So in this case, a quart of Roundup followed by a quart of Roundup. And then we used AMS as the only adjuvant for any of these pictures. So on glyphosate-resistant water hemp, Roundup followed by Roundup, that's what you can get. If we just tank mix Liberty plus Enlist 1, do a pretty on 3-inch water hemp, do a pretty good job cleaning it up, but of course, plenty of water hemp escapes there, and this will be pretty ugly by the end of the year. This is taken about 4 weeks after that application, the picture on the right. But if I do want to compare that, Liberty plus Enlist 1 tank mix, again, plenty of escapes here, but that was a wall of 3-inch tall water hemp we applied it to. But compare that to Liberty by itself. So one of the good things that we can use in the Enlist system is if we tank mix Liberty plus Enlist 1, it's actually a pretty good and synergistic application on our broadleaf weeds, such as water hemp. And the same thing would be true for common ragweed as well, and some of our other problematic weeds. Now, this picture on the right here, this is, again, a quart of Liberty, followed 14 days later by a quart of Liberty. And the reason I want to show this picture and spend a little bit of time talking about it is I probably have gotten more phone calls and emails about Liberty failure on water hemp in my first 2 years up here than any other combination of weed and herbicide failure. And one of the things we've learned is that a lot of times the Liberty will get sprayed on water hemp, will have escapes, and then the cleanup application comes 3, 4, maybe 5 weeks after that first application, and we'll still have some plant escape in that Liberty application. When in our research trials here, these were planned sequential applications 14 days after the first. So they're showing here that if you have that second application of Liberty planned to go out 14 days after the first one, we were able to clean up just about all the water hemp plants in that block. So something I'll be looking at a little bit closer next year is staggering that sequential application to see if it's 3, 4, or 5 weeks when the failure to control water hemp with a respray really sets in. Okay, then of course the other things we can do with Enlist soybean to start getting into some 2- and 3-way mixes. So again here for some really good water hemp control, we had a quart of Liberty plus a quart of Enlist 1, followed by that same program, and taking a month after that second application, pretty good results. And then add all 3 together to quart Liberty, Roundup, and Enlist 1, followed by the same program. Maybe if I dug around, I could find a water hemp plant in there, but a pretty good post-emergence program. Again, planned sequential 14 days apart. Okay, so with the Enlist system, we can do those tank mixes. The Extend Flex system, I did mention we can use all 3 of the products, Liberty, glyphosate, and then dicamba. The one thing to keep in mind with the Extend Flex system is that at least for the 2021 season, we will not be able to tank mix Liberty and dicamba. If we look at volatility research from other universities and the companies themselves, A good way to increase dicamba volatility is to tank mix it with Liberty. So until there's some mechanism out there to overcome the increased volatility of a Liberty plus dicamba tank mix, that is why that will be prohibited, at least in the 2021 season and probably moving forward as well. So what we can do is different tank mixes of either Liberty plus Roundup or dicamba plus Roundup. And again, here, this is a quart of Liberty, quart of Roundup, then a half pound of dicamba, so that 22 ounces of XtendiMax or 12.8 of Ingenia. The main thing I want to show here, another program here where we decide to skip the pre just for this research trial. So on the left here is using Liberty first, followed by dicamba second. On the right is using that dicamba first, followed by the Liberty second. The reason I point this out is this has been pretty consistent for me the last 2 years, is starting with Liberty and then following with dicamba on water hemp is the better option in the XtendFlex soybean system than the opposite, at least my research trials here in Fargo. The reason I bring that up is areas in more southern parts of the U.S., certainly the I-states, for example, and then the Mid-South, they're consistently seen using the auxin first, so starting with dicamba, and then following with Liberty has been their better option down there. So could be something with the climate, something else here we need to tease out a little bit further, but up here we've seen starting with Liberty has been the better option and following with dicamba that way. So showing two potential uses of the XtendFlex soybean system. And again here, just showing again, this doesn't clean everything up, so gotta remember to have that pre in the tank for complete water hemp control. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the mixing compatibility issues of the Enlist system. And so I've shared some of these pictures and results here the past year or so. But with the Enlist system, there's a couple things we need to remember when it comes to chemistry. So here's the list on the left there is glyphosate that's approved for use as a tank mix partner with Enlist 1. So a number of different products. And of course, the thing to remember with glyphosate is we have a number of different salt formulations. I just chose 3 here to look at. Durango DMA, which is a dimethylamine or a DMA salt. Credit Extra is a isopropylamine or an IPA salt. And then Roundup Power Max is one of our many available potassium salts. The reason I bring this up is that we've had some issues commercially, and we can even see it in jar tests, of compatibility issues when we mix a potassium salt of glyphosate with the Enlist 1 product. And I want to show you what that looks like here in a jar test. So those same 3 glyphosate products I listed on the previous slide, so Durango, Credit Extra, and then Roundup Power Max. So 3 different salts. We line them up, a low water volume. So this is probably the equivalent of 2 to 5 gallons per acre. And we mix the products together, glyphosate product plus Enlist 1 in the tank, pretty close to each other. The DMA salt plus Enlist 1 went into solution pretty well. Same with the IPA plus Enlist 1. It's that potassium salt with Enlist 1, if we don't allow plenty of opportunity for the first product to mix into the tank before adding the second product, is when we get some precipitates and some crystallization. And so here's just a close-up of what was happening in that tank, and then an even closer picture. We can see some of these salt crystals formulating and falling out of the solution. So that first picture was taken within 5 minutes of mixing those jars together. We came back 1 hour later, the DMA and the IPA salts with Enlist 1 still in solution, and that potassium salt, you can see the 2 different substances we have in that tank there. And we can see similar results with just AMS and Enlist 1. So again, AMS is the adjuvant that we do want to use with the Enlist system, but we do want to allow that AMS to fully dissolve in water before we add Enlist. And so if we add the AMS and then add Enlist quickly thereafter, we can get the same type of salting out event occurring and leaving white residues all over. So here's just AMS plus Enlist 1 added directly after the AMS. And this is just showing a couple of different approved AMS formulations. If we don't wait, we can get all sorts of different fun crystallization processes. So luckily, we had a couple of these issues on the commercial scale. Corteva has done a pretty good job during their trainings and putting some fact sheets together about the proper mixing methods for Enlist 1 if you do want to use the potassium salts, and just pointing that out here, that mixing solution, the potassium salts, glyphosate, or glufosinate ammonium, basically we have to add one product at a time and allow plenty of time for recirculation to allow the first product to fully dissolve into solution before going on and adding the next product. So I mentioned glufosinate ammonium, which is Liberty. We've seen some similar issues with Liberty, just not nearly the same dramatic result that we saw with the potassium salt glyphosate. And here's again showing that picture when we add Enlist 1 and Liberty to the tank together. We get some residue left behind, but in jar testing, I have not been able to see the same dramatic issues that we saw with the potassium salt of glyphosate. Okay, now this slide is basically showing if we do want to use a potassium salt of glyphosate, if let's just say Roundup Power Max or our favorite glyphosate or another K salt, we're going to use it. Can we make it work? Well, yes, absolutely. We just follow the mixing order. So again, here's a potassium salt of glyphosate with Enlist 1, and we also have AMS in the tank. And so what I'm showing here is actually 5 and 10 gallons per acre carrier volume. And of course, we have to use a minimum of 10 for the Enlist system, but we do want to target 15 for better coverage and weed control. But even in lower volumes, basically what we did here is we added the AMS, allowed 3 to 5 minutes for the AMS to dissolve in water, and then we added the Enlist 1, gave that 2 to 3 minutes to dissolve, and then the potassium salt of glyphosate, and then going with that order, allowing plenty of time for the products to dissolve. We did not have the salting out process. We let these bottles sit there on the shelf for 4 days, and 4 days later, they were still in solution. So this is really an issue that can occur when we're mixing things quickly and these concentrated products come into contact with each other. So just kind of a warning sign or something to keep in mind that I know logistics always get in the way during post-emergence application season, but we can make these work without much issue. Just have to make sure we take the time and mix everything in the proper order. All right, I know I do have a little bit of time here, so I will go to the last slides I stuck here at the end. So I'm going to come back to this slide here. But first, I want to show a little bit of data about pH of the spray solution. So with the 2019 dicamba labels, if you read the fine print, we basically had in the fine print, if the pH of the spray solution was below 5, you need to add a pH modifier to raise the pH back above 5. Again, raising the pH of a dicamba spray solution to avoid volatility issues. So we did a little project up here to look at some of these approved products. I just want to point out these were products approved on the 2019 and 2020 labels to adjust pHs. These products right now, the in-demand products we're going to talk about, they are not approved currently for 2021, and I don't know if they will be. Odds are they probably won't be approved as being the pH modifying adjuvants we can use. But just want to show that we can use these to adjust the pH and some of the issues we can run into. So the trial here, we used, this is a typo, this should be a 1/4 pound of dicamba and then a 1/2 pound of glyphosate. And we used 3 different adjuvants that we can use to adjust the pH. And what we did was we added the half rates of glyphosate and dicamba to a tank, measured the pH. Then we added the products to that tank, and we also measured the pH after adding those products. So in this case, when we added in-demand 88 at a quart per acre, we went from 4.65 pH up to 5.85 after adding that to the spray solution. The Entourage K raised about 2 pH units. Linkage in this case, which wasn't approved anyways, but it did not raise the pH a whole lot, but it did raise it some. And it's going to show we sprayed this on some different crops just to see some potential results. And then we had some green foxtail out in Carrington. And so what I'm showing here is control on the y-axis. The 4 bars represent dicamba plus glyphosate by themselves, with in-demand 88, with that in-demand Entourage K, and then with linkage. And so these half rates, we didn't lose a whole lot of control on volunteer flax, except for when we had that the Entourage K, which was that product that did raise the pH 2 units. And here's just showing what that looks like in picture form. No adjuvant here on the left, and then adding that in-demand product on the right. Just a lot of loss of volunteer flax there. And then some data here on green foxtail as well, showing that in this case, whenever we added any of these products, all of which did raise the pH of varying levels, we did in fact lose control on green foxtail out in Carrington. Now, what I didn't add and what I don't have time to show is that in many other combinations, we did not see any effect on weed control with these products that raise the pH. So common lamb's quarters, buckwheat, and a couple other broadleaf weeds that we had in this trial, we did not see this sort of difference. But in some of these instances, green foxtail and then flax specifically, when we raised the pH, we did see a loss of control with some of these products. So again, a testing like that is something that we're going to want to try with the approved products now moving forward, the Vapor Grip Extra agents and then Centris, to see what that looks like out in the field. But we don't have any data on those products specifically to date. So to finish here, just want to plug a podcast I'm a part of with my colleagues at Kansas State and University of Missouri. So wherever you like to listen to your podcast, if you look up War Against Weeds, we now have about 5 episodes out in the podcast world. We're going to have one every week, dropping on Wednesdays. So just kind of a platform to look at some deeper dives in all things weed science, and take about a half hour each week to talk about weed science and different aspects of weed control. So that I'm going to end here on contact information, phone number there, email address. If you're on Twitter, there's my handle if you want to follow me. And again, I'd tell you to have the QR code here available if you want the electronic version of the weed control guide. So that, I know I'm right out of time, and be happy to take any questions.